I was about to marry the woman of my dreams. Emma and I had just put down a $100,000 deposit on our first home together. I contributed $50,000 from my savings. We were sitting at dinner with her parents when she suddenly announced, "I have decided we need a prenup. Everything stays separate." I smiled and said, "Perfect timing. I just withdrew my name from our house deposit." The looks on her parents' faces when they realized their daughter just lost $50,000 was priceless. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button if you want to hear how this all played out. I met Emma at a tech conference in Boston 3 years ago. I was presenting a new software development framework my team had created, and she was there representing her law firm that specialized in tech patents. The moment I saw her confidently asking pointed questions during the Q&A session, I was captivated. She had this remarkable combination of sharp intelligence and warm charm that I found irresistible. After my presentation, Emma approached me with her business card and some follow-up questions. What started as a professional conversation quickly turned personal when I suggested grabbing coffee to discuss her questions in more detail. That coffee turned into dinner, and before I knew it, we were seeing each other regularly. Emma came from a family of successful attorneys. The Wilsons were well known in legal circles across New England. Her father, Frank, was a senior partner at one of the most prestigious law firms in Boston. Her mother, Diane, was a former corporate attorney who now sat on several boards, and her older brother, James, followed in their father's footsteps as a Perseo, rising star in corporate law. I, on the other hand, had a much humbler background. My parents were school teachers from Michigan who had saved every penny to put me through college. I worked my way up in the tech industry through sheer determination and technical skill. By the time I met Emma, I was a senior software engineer leading an innovative team at a growing tech company. I had built a decent life for myself, but it was nothing compared to the generational wealth and connections the Wilsons possessed. From the beginning, I could tell that Emma family, particularly her father, viewed me with skepticism. During our first dinner together, Frank interrogated me about my career prospects, education, and financial stability in a way that felt more like a deposition than a family meal. When I mentioned my parents were teachers, I saw the subtle exchange of glances between Emma's parents. It was clear they thought their daughter could do better than someone from my background. Despite her family reservations, Emma and I fell deeply in love. She appreciated my authenticity and drive, while I admired her intelligence and compassion. After 2 years of dating, I proposed during a weekend trip to the Maine coastline. Emma said yes, immediately tears streaming down her face as I placed my grandmother ring on her finger. It was not an expensive diamond, but it was filled with sentimental value, and Emma seemed to treasure it. Once we were engaged, we started discussing our future together more seriously. We both agreed that buying a home would be our first major step. The Boston housing market was competitive, but we found a beautiful craftsman-style home in a charming neighborhood that we both loved. The asking price was steep at $800,000, and we would need to put down a $100,000 deposit to secure it. I had been saving diligently for years and had $50,000 to contribute. Emma matched that amount from her own savings. We were thrilled when our offer was accepted, and we signed the preliminary paperwork together, both our names on the deposit. However, I began noticing subtle changes in Emma's behavior after our engagement became official. She started asking more detailed questions about my finances, career trajectory, and long-term plans. At first, I thought she was just being practical as we planned our future together. But there was something in her tone that occasionally made me uneasy, as if she was evaluating me rather than planning with me. One night, she mentioned casually that her father had asked if we had discussed financial arrangements before the wedding. I asked what she meant, and she glossed over it, saying it was nothing important. In retrospect, I should have pressed for more details, but I was so caught up in wedding planning and house preparations that I let it slide. Emma also began receiving more frequent calls from her parents, often stepping outside or into another room to take them privately. Again, I thought nothing of it initially, assuming they were discussing wedding details or family matters. Looking back, I realize how naive I was about what was really happening behind the scenes. The first real warning sign came about 2 months after our engagement. I had come home early from work one day and overheard Emma on the phone with her mother. I was not trying to eavesdrop, but as I approached our apartment door, I could hear her voice clearly through the partially open window. "You need to protect the family assets," her mother was saying firmly. "Do not let him have access to anything substantial. Your father and I have worked too hard to build what we have." "I know, Mom," Emma responded, sounding conflicted. "I will talk to Dad's lawyer about drawing up the papers. I just need to find the right time to bring it up with Orville." I stood frozen outside our door, the words hitting me like physical blows. I could not believe what I was hearing. The woman I loved, the woman I planned to spend my life with, was plotting behind my back to keep her assets separate from mine. It was not even that I wanted her money. I had never cared about that. What hurt was the deception, the lack of trust. I took a long walk around the neighborhood to clear my head before returning home, pretending I had not heard anything. That night I paid close attention to Emma's behavior, looking for any signs that she might bring up the topic. She was affectionate, as always, discussing wedding venue options and showing me paint samples for our new home. The disconnect between her secret plans and her loving behavior toward me was jarring. A week later, I discovered more concrete evidence. Emma had left her laptop open while she took a shower, and an email notification popped up on her screen. Normally, I would never invade her privacy, but the subject line caught my eye. Prenuptial agreement draft. The sender was someone named Thomas Bradley, whom I recognized as one of her father colleagues. Before I could stop myself, I clicked on the email. What I read confirmed my worst fears. Emma had been corresponding with this lawyer about creating a prenuptial agreement that would ensure all her current and future assets remained completely separate from mine. The agreement would also stipulate that any properties purchased together would be divided according to exact contribution percentages in case of divorce. There was also mention of the house we were in the process of buying. The email suggested language to ensure that Emma would retain ownership rights proportional to her investment, regardless of whose name was on the title. The lawyer had even included a note suggesting they might want to consider getting my name removed from the property title altogether, listing me merely as an occupant with limited rights. I felt physically sick reading these exchanges, not just because of the content, but because all of this was happening without any discussion with me. Emma and I had always talked about building a life together as equal partners. We had shared dreams of raising children in that house, growing old on that porch. Now I realized she had been viewing our relationship through a very different lens. After several sleepless nights, I decided I needed to protect myself. I scheduled a discreet appointment with a lawyer of my own, a college friend named Michael, who specialized in property law. I explained the situation and asked about my options regarding the house deposit. Michael explained that since the purchase was still in the early stages and the final contracts had not been signed, I could potentially withdraw my name and my $50,000 contribution from the deposit. However, he warned me that this could complicate Emma's ability to complete the purchase, as she would need to either find another $50,000 quickly or risk losing the house and potentially the entire deposit. I was torn about what to do. On one hand, I still loved Emma and wanted to believe we could work through this. On the other hand, I felt deeply betrayed and needed to protect myself financially. After careful consideration, I decided to quietly withdraw my name and my $50,000 from the deposit. I did not tell Emma, partly because I was hurt, but also because I wanted to see if she would actually bring up the prenup before I showed my hand. The withdrawal process took about a week to complete. During that time, I maintained our normal routine, all while carrying this heavy secret. I felt terrible about the deception, but I kept reminding myself that Emma had been planning her own deception for much longer. Each night as we lay in bed discussing our future home, knowing what I knew was a special kind of torture. Meanwhile, Emma's parents invited us to dinner at Laurel, one of the most exclusive restaurants in Boston. According to Emma, they wanted to discuss some wedding details and get to know me better. I suspected there might be another agenda at play, but I agreed to go, curious to see how things would unfold. The night of the dinner arrived, and I felt a strange combination of dread and anticipation as we entered the restaurant. Laurel was exactly the type of place the Wilsons would choose, with its crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, and waitstaff that appeared and disappeared like ghosts. Frank and Diane Wilson were already seated when we arrived, both impeccably dressed and looking completely at home in such opulent surroundings. Frank barely stood to greet me, offering a limp handshake before immediately returning to his conversation with the sommelier about wine vintages. Diane gave me a cold kiss on the cheek, her eyes evaluating my suit, which, while nice, clearly did not meet her standards. Emma's brother James arrived a few minutes later, making a show of checking his Rolex and apologizing for being detained by an important client call. The beginning of the dinner was filled with the usual small talk. Frank asked perfunctory questions about my work, barely listening to my answers, before steering the conversation back to family vacations in the Hamptons or James' recent courtroom victory. I noticed how they constantly referred to events, people, and places that excluded me, creating a bubble of privilege that I could observe but never enter. When Emma excused herself to use the restroom, Frank leaned in and asked how the house purchase was proceeding. I smiled politely and told him everything was moving forward as planned. He nodded, mentioning that Emma had excellent taste in real estate and that the neighborhood had strong investment potential. The way he emphasized investment made it clear he was thinking of the house as a financial asset rather than our future home. Emma returned, just as the main course was being served. She seemed slightly nervous, fidgeting with her napkin and taking quick sips of her wine. I could tell something was coming. Frank and Diane exchanged knowing glances, and James suddenly became very interested in his steak. After a moment of uncomfortable silence, Emma cleared her throat and turned to me. Her voice was steady but slightly higher pitched than normal as she said, "I have been thinking, Orville. I believe we should have a prenuptial agreement before we get married. I have discussed it with Dad lawyer, and he thinks it makes the most sense for us to keep everything separate. All assets stay separate. All inheritances stay separate. All earnings stay separate." The table went quiet. Frank and Diane were watching me, carefully, barely disguised smirks on their faces. James was pretending to be absorbed in cutting his steak, but I could see him watching me from the corner of his eye. They were all waiting for my reaction, probably expecting me to be blindsided, upset, or defensive. Instead, I took a slow sip of my water and smiled calmly. "Perfect timing," I said. "I have actually been meaning to tell you something." Emma looked confused, clearly not expecting this response. "What do you mean?" she asked. "Well," I continued, maintaining my composure. "Despite my racing heart, I took my name off our house deposit last week. I also withdrew my $50,000. The reaction was immediate and dramatic." Emma's face drained of color. Frank stopped mid-sip, his wine glass suspended in the air. Diane gasped audibly. James finally looked up from his steak, his fork clattering against his plate. "You did what?" Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. I repeated myself clearly. "I removed my name and my $50,000 from our house deposit last week." "Why would you do that?" Emma demanded, her shock turning quickly to anger. "We are buying that house together." I shrugged slightly. "I thought since you wanted everything to stay separate, this made the most sense. My $50,000 will stay with me, and your $50,000 will stay with you." Frank slammed his hand on the table, causing the silverware to jump. "This is outrageous. You cannot just pull out of a real estate deal like that. There are contracts, obligations." "Actually, I can," I replied, reaching into my jacket pocket and pulling out the papers my lawyer had prepared. The purchase agreement was still in the preliminary stage, and I filed all the proper paperwork to remove myself from the transaction. Everything was done legally. Diane turned to Emma, her voice sharp. "What does this mean for the house, Emma? Can you still complete the purchase?" Emma was staring at me in horror as the implications sank in. Without my $50,000, she would either need to come up with that money immediately or lose the house and possibly forfeit the entire deposit if she could not meet the terms of the agreement. "I do not have another 50,000 just sitting around," she admitted, looking panicked. "Dad, can you help?" Frank's face was turning an alarming shade of red. "This is blackmail," he shouted, drawing looks from nearby tables. "You planned this all along." I laughed, genuinely amused by his accusation. "Actually, no. I only found out about the prenup plans when I overheard Emma talking to Diane on the phone a few weeks ago. Then I saw the emails with your lawyer. You were the ones planning things behind my back," Emma gasped. "You went through my emails?" "No, I saw a notification pop up on your laptop. The subject line was pretty clear, and unlike you, I was honest about what I discovered. I did not continue to pretend everything was fine while plotting behind your back." James finally spoke up, his lawyer instincts kicking in. "The deposit is refundable, right, Emma?" She shook her head miserably. "No, it is non-refundable at this stage. If we do not complete the purchase, we lose the entire amount." "So, you just cost my sister $50,000, James said accusingly. I shook my head. "No, I protected my own $50,000. Emma's decisions are what put her $50,000 at risk. If she had been honest with me from the beginning about wanting a prenup, we could have discussed it openly and made decisions together about the house. Instead, she tried to secure my financial commitment before springing this on me." Diane turned to Emma, her voice cold. "I told you to get this sorted out before you made any major purchases together. This is exactly what your father and I were worried about." I nearly laughed at the absurdity. They were talking about me as if I was some gold digger they needed to protect their precious daughter from, when in reality, I was the one being manipulated. Emma started to cry, mascara running down her cheeks. "How could you do this to me, Orville? I thought you loved me." That cut deep despite everything. "I did love you, Emma. I still do. But love requires trust, and you have been planning to legally separate yourself from me, while letting me believe we were building a life together. How is that love?" The dinner descended into chaos after that. Frank threatened to sue me, though both he and I knew he had no grounds. James attempted to explain to Emma exactly how much money she stood to lose. Diane alternated between comforting Emma and shooting venomous glares my way. Through it all, I maintained my composure, though inside I was heartbroken. Eventually, I had enough. I stood up, placed my napkin on the table, and said, "I think this engagement is over. I wish you all the best." As I turned to leave, Emma grabbed my arm. "You cannot just walk away. We need to talk about this." I gently removed her hand. "There is nothing left to say. You and your family made it clear that I was never really accepted. You were planning to keep me at arm's length, even after marriage. That is not the kind of relationship I want." Frank stood up too, towering over me with his imposing height. My daughter was being prudent. Any sensible person protects their assets. I looked him in the eye. "Then your daughter should have been honest about that from the beginning, not after I had already financially committed to our future together. And you should have raised her to value more than just assets." With that, I walked out of the restaurant, ignoring the stares from other diners. The cool night air hit my face as I stepped outside, and I took a deep breath. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe freely again. Yes, I had just ended my engagement. Yes, I had walked away from the woman I thought I would spend my life with. But I had also stood up for myself and my own worth. The next few days were a blur of painful logistics. Emma called and texted constantly, alternating between tearful pleas for reconciliation and angry accusations. Her father called, once starting with threats before switching to awkward attempts at negotiation. I remained firm in my decision. The news spread quickly among our social circle. Some mutual friends sided with Emma, seeing me as the villain who had sabotaged the house purchase out of spite. Others, particularly those who had witnessed Emma's family condescension toward me over the years, understood my position. What surprised me most were the calls I received from two of Emma's cousins and her college roommate. They all shared similar stories about how the Wilsons had always been calculating about money and status. Her roommate specifically said Emma was raised to see relationships as transactions. It is not entirely her fault, but I am glad you stood up for yourself. A week after the disastrous dinner, I was packing up my belongings from our apartment when Emma came home unexpectedly. She looked terrible with dark circles under her eyes, and her usually immaculate appearance disheveled. "You have ruined everything," she said quietly, watching me box up my books. "The house deal fell through. I lost my entire $50,000 deposit." I paused my packing. "I am sorry about that. Truly. But you were planning to blindside me with a prenup after I had already financially committed to our future. What did you expect would happen?" She sat heavily on the couch. "I did not think you would find out until I was ready to discuss it. Dad and Mom insisted it was necessary. They said it would be foolish to merge assets with someone who had so much less than me." Her honesty was both refreshing and painful. "So you were just following their advice without considering how I might feel?" Emma looked down at her hands. "I guess I was. I have always done what they expected of me." She twisted her engagement ring, my grandmother, ring around her finger. "What happens now?" I closed the box I was packing and sealed it with tape. "Now we go our separate ways. I will be moved out by tomorrow. Can we not work through this?" she asked, a hint of the Emma I had fallen in love with showing through her family programming. I shook my head. "The trust is gone, Emma. I cannot build a life with someone who is planning to keep one foot out the door. I deserve better than that, and honestly, so do you. You deserve to be with someone you truly trust, not someone your parents make you feel you need legal protection from." I moved in with my friend Tyler temporarily, while looking for a new place. The $50,000 I had withdrawn from the house deposit became my fresh start fund. After careful consideration, I invested $30,000 of it in a promising startup founded by a former colleague. The remaining $20,000 became the security deposit and first few months' rent on a small but comfortable apartment in Cambridge. 6 months passed. The startup I invested in began gaining significant traction, and my $30,000 investment was already worth nearly twice that on paper. My career was thriving too, as I channeled my emotional energy into creative coding projects that earned recognition within my company and the broader tech community. I had started dating again cautiously at first. I met Sophia, an architectural engineer, at a mutual friend housewarming party. Unlike my relationship with Emma, which had always carried an undercurrent of me needing to prove my worth, Sophia and I connected as equals from the start. Her warmth, authenticity, and complete lack of pretension were like a balm to my wounded heart. One evening, about 8 months after the breakup, I ran into Emma at a tech industry networking event. She looked thinner, more subdued, but still beautiful in a way that momentarily made my heart ache. She approached me hesitantly. "How have you been?" she asked, her voice carrying none of the entitlement I had come to associate with the Wilsons. "Good. Actually," I replied honestly. "And you?" She gave a small, sad smile. "Better now. After everything happened, I did a lot of thinking about who I am, apart from my family expectations. I even started therapy. I was genuinely glad to hear it." "That sounds positive." She nodded. "It is. I realized I was about to marry you while still viewing everything through my parents' lens. That would have been unfair to both of us." She paused, then added, "I am sorry, Orville, for everything." Her apology seemed sincere, and I found that the anger I had carried for months had largely dissipated. "I accept your apology. I hope you find what you are looking for, Emma." As we parted ways, I felt a sense of closure that had been missing. I realized that standing up for myself had not only protected me financially, but had also preserved my sense of self-worth. The $50,000 I saved by withdrawing from the house deposit was significant, but the lesson about valuing myself was priceless. Today, Sophia and I have been together for over a year. We recently started talking about moving in together, approaching the topic with complete transparency about finances, expectations, and long-term goals. The trust we have built feels solid, in a way my relationship with Emma never did, even in our best moments. Looking back, I realized that the prenup itself was never the real issue. Had Emma approached me honestly from the beginning, we might have found a fair arrangement that respected both our interests. The problem was the deception, the lack of trust, and the fundamental inequality that her family insisted on maintaining. The most valuable lesson I learned from this experience was the importance of standing up for my own worth, not just financially but emotionally and psychologically. No relationship can truly thrive when one partner is valued less than the other, regardless of their bank account balance or family connections. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had not overheard that phone call or seen that email notification. Would I have discovered the truth only after we were married? Would I have spent years trying to earn the approval of a family that had already decided I was not good enough? The thought makes me shudder. Instead, I am building a new life based on mutual respect and genuine partnership. Sophia and I approach decisions together, neither of us assuming authority over the other. When we disagree, we work through it with honesty rather than manipulation. It is not always easy, but it is real in a way my relationship with Emma never was. As for the $50,000 that started all this drama, it turned out to be one of the best investments I ever made, not just financially, but in myself. Standing your ground sometimes costs you what you thought you wanted, only to lead you to what you truly need. If you have ever had to make a difficult choice to preserve your self-respect, share your story in the comments below. I would love to hear how you navigated your own crossroads moments. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more real-life experiences that remind us all of the importance of self-worth. Remember, sometimes the most valuable thing you can invest in is your own dignity. Thank you for listening, and I wish you the courage to know your worth in every relationship you build.